The high jump is a track and field event that dates back to the early 19th century Scotland. The way they jumped back then and the way we jump now are very different. Today, people are accustomed to seeing a jumper go over the pole backwards, but this technique was not used until 1947 by the 16-year-old Dick Fosbury. His Fosbury flop is now the most commonly used technique, but before it was the straddle method. This method did not allow athletes to go nearly as high as they can today using the Fosbury flop. Every object has a center of mass, the place in the body at which all the mass is concentrated. Humans are able to change their center of mass by bending their bodies. When performing the Fosbury flop, athletes arch their back as they go over the pole, resulting in their center of mass being outside of their body and below the pole. They no longer have to get their center of mass over the pole, as they did using the straddle method. Another important part of this technique is impulse, which is the change in momentum of an object represented by the magnitude of a force times the amount of time it acts on an object. In order to best execute the jump, jumpers must run as quickly as possible and plant their foot right before the jump, resulting in the greatest possible impulse. The greater the impulse, the greater the force exerted on the ground by the athlete. Newton's third law of motion states that with each force there is a force of equal magnitude and opposite direction resultant force. Therefore, the ground exerts a greater force on the athlete as a result of this greater force on the ground. This is a perfect execution of the flop. The athlete began with a fast approach and plants his foot right before he jumps, allowing him to exert a force for a longer period of time, thus having a greater displacement. While going over the pole, he arched his back at the proper angle to allow his center of mass to leave his body and be under the pole. This person did not run up at a very high speed, nor did he ever plant his foot. His slow approach only permitted a very small change in horizontal momentum, and thus barely any vertical momentum at all. This lack of momentum resulted in a smaller impulse and therefore a smaller force exerted on the ground and less, thus time for force to be exerted on the boy by the ground. He also did not arch his back enough for his center of mass to leave his body and be under the bar. He was consequently not able to clear the pole because he had to get his center of mass completely over the pole rather than allowing it to clear a small height, resulting in his landing on the pole rather than going over it like he was supposed to. This woman failed to have a horizontal velocity as well as a vertical velocity. It is apparent that she only goes up and not over. It is necessary to have a horizontal displacement and a horizontal velocity, which can be accomplished by having a fast approach and planting the foot on the ground in a way that increases vertical velocity while decreasing horizontal velocity. Although, it is still necessary to have enough horizontal velocity to carry the jumper over the bar. Had the woman have made it over the bar, it is unlikely she would have gone very high since she was using the straddle method and not the Fosbury flop. This athlete's main issue is that in an attempt to use the Fosbury flop and arch his back, he unintentionally folded forward into a V shape rather than a parabolic shape. This means that his center of mass does not exit his body to permit him to go higher than if he had properly executed the jumping technique. His lack of an arch back resulted in him hitting the pole. This jump resulted in a gold medal, thanks to its perfect execution. His fast approach allowed him to have a big velocity and plant his foot to allow his velocity to drop to zero, resulting in a larger impulse. This allows for a longer time for the force to be exerted. His arched back allows him to go higher because his center of mass does not have to go over the bar. This method allows the athlete to reach great heights. Overall, the high jump was revolutionized as athletes slowly began to comprehend the in-depth physics involved in such an impressive feat. Through the perfect balance between horizontal and vertical velocity, normal force, and a change in the center of mass, physics has altered the entire culture of the high jump forever.